Hi, thanks Donna, and welcome everybody. And thanks so much for joining us today on the last of our webinar series, designed to deliver practical insight and assets that you can use immediately to move your business forward. Today's topic is actually a rerun of our first webinar, but because actually it was so oversubscribed the first time round that we agreed and decided to rerun it. And the subject is qualifying opportunities virtually. So as we work through how to operate in this new world of social distancing, and actually not so new world now, we've been at it for some time, and virtual interactions, time, and that is ours and our customers, seems more precious than ever before. And how we use that time has to be as effective as possible. So I had a great example of a client changing their perspective a week or so ago. She's a senior sales leader, and I asked her for an update call just to check in and see where we were with the project. She suggested 9 o'clock Eastern time. We're both based in North America, by the way. So wanting to be sensitive to her calendar, I just kind of double checked and just, are you sure she really meant then? And she said, oh yes, said, as you know, and I've known her for a while, I have 2 children, 5 and 7. And so I've completely changed my working day around so that I can read them every night. And she smiled. She was really pleased with herself for doing it. And she felt they'd been unsettled enough, and also remarked that her team, the leadership, customers, partners, had all just adapted immediately. They didn't seem to mind at all. In fact, she mused on the fact that she wished she'd done it earlier in her career, which is, I guess maybe would have worked, maybe wouldn't. So in the new normal, we seem to have more time, but maybe we have less time, and maybe it's just different time. And so, and importantly, our customers are experiencing the same unforeseen and unwelcome disruption to their daily lives and workflows. So as sales professionals, we need to adapt both with and for our customers and prospects to be successful. And there are many ways to do that, but today we'd like you to think it through in terms of these 2 lenses. So firstly, how can you deliberately decide to be more strategic and efficient in qualifying your opportunities so that your time is spent more effectively, and so is your customers, so that you get the best return between you for the combined invested time? And secondly, we'd ask you all to remember that customers and prospects judge us on the quality of the questions that we ask. So the structure and delivery of our questions has to be exactly right. First and foremost, out of respect for their schedule, but also to ensure that we put the appropriate products and solutions and recommendations in front of them when the time is right. And that may not be now, but when the time is right. So we go to our first slide, if we could, Kathy. We're going to look at this in 3 areas, please. First, we're going to share some perspective and a specific tool that you can download at the end to assist you in being continually strategic and efficient in how you qualify opportunities. And then we're going to move on to cover in some detail a set of questions and how to frame them that are in everybody's mind and will help pretty much regardless of your product or service that you deliver. Just a generic set of a framework of questions you can use. And then finally, we'd love to give you an opportunity to share what's working for you in these extraordinary times, and we'll share that with the wider group. So next slide, if you would, please. So let's kick things off with a poll, if we would. And this is a question about how we are, or you are, managing your opportunities in the new normal. The question is a kind of yes, no sort of. So please respond to the poll that you will see appear on your screens. And the question is, our organisation consistently applies a formal approach to qualifying opportunities. And formal in this context means something that is written down, something that people understand and use. And so just give us a sense about whether you or your organisation are doing that, and we'll just see how we're starting off. So Donna, whenever you're ready with the results, people have had a chance to vote, that would be good. And we've asked this question in a number of different environments, and we've frankly received, this is a great normal bell curve. I'd call it a normal distribution. So unsurprisingly, there are some yes and some no's and lots of sort ofs. And we're not at all surprised to see that. I mean, we know from our own research that having a formal process has a strong correlation with improved performance. And we'd suggest that without the privilege of face-to-face engagement, it becomes even more important to have some sort of formal, maybe with a small f, a lowercase f, formal process to what you do. So next slide, if we could. We have two, I'm joined today by two colleagues and friends. First is Kathy Nelson. Kathy has 30 years of sales and sales management experience. She's passionate about Miller Heiman tools and processes, having used them as a salesperson and deployed them as a sales leader. And then as a sales consultant, she successfully assisted clients in driving sales performance, funnel efficacy, and change management. I mean, she's respected in the industry for creating customer-focused selling and go-to-market strategies across the globe. Kathy will handle the second part of our material. But first we also have with us Rob West. Rob was a client of ours when he led sales functions at organizations like Fidelity and Aramark. And he's been a consulting partner with Miller Heiman, Korn, Ferry for the last 17 years. He's worked with organizations, global and local, in most industries, but with a concentration in financial services, insurance, and professional services. So over to you, Rob.
Thanks, Mark. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thanks for giving us some of your day. Mark, it was great to hear your story about that senior VP in terms of scheduling that call with you at 9 o'clock Eastern. I'm seeing similar trends. You know, we're hearing in this new normal that finding empathy and actually connectivity and being personal is so much harder in a virtual environment when we're, you know, confined to our home offices. But I'll tell you personally, maybe some of you have felt this yourself, that I'm finding that the opposite is actually true, that there's so much of a heightened opportunity to connect with people on a much deeper personal level to bring some of the defenses down. And I think I can give a couple of examples. I'd love to hear some of the examples that some of you all that have joined the session have probably experienced. One was with a senior leader from a professional services firm where we were on a Zoom call and his 9-year-old son was screaming in the background saying, "Dad, where's the shaving cream?" And he's you know, apologized for the interruption. He said, why do you need shaving cream? To which his son said, "I've got all the other ingredients to make green slime. I've got the saline solution. I've got the food coloring. I've got the Elmer's glue, but I need shaving cream." And he's like, "Are you kidding me?" A few days before that, I was joined by Mark, who you just heard from, with a senior leader from a large asset management company. In the midst of our meeting, she was being distracted by her very cute and delightful 4-year-old, and she just asked for permission to bring him onto her lap when we were on a video call like this, at which we said, of course, right? You know, life goes on. And he was, you know, a little uncomfortable and, you know, squirming, and Mark was clever enough to bring forward a little fire truck on screen. Mark, do you have that fire truck that you showed that client's 4-year-old son?
Embarrassingly, I do. Actually, yes, here is the said fire truck. And Rob makes a really good point, because there was a moment in our call when a very senior leader and a client and two people in Rob and I who were trying to have a really serious conversation were sitting there with her young son and a fire truck on a call talking about, you know, a multi-million-dollar piece of engagement for them. And I would argue with you, Rob, that I agree. I think the opportunity for deeper relationships in certain circumstances is enhanced by where we are. So that's a great example.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, the other thing that's happening in this new normal is that everybody's got the latest and greatest ideas on selling in the virtual world. I will tell you, I've probably now attended 14 or 15 webinars, and there's some great thinking on the wire. But one of the things that has frustrated me personally, perhaps some of you, is that a lot of it's theoretical or academic, and it's very hard to bring it to, you know, the surface and actually make it practical. I love some of your opening comments, Mark, about practical guidance, a tool that's coming out of this session. Our commitment to you when we published this series was to try to give you some things that you could go away and put into practice and put into action immediately. And so with that in mind, Kathy, if you could jump forward, what we would love to do is do another poll, because we're about to start to have a conversation about the backbone of strategic and efficient opportunity qualification. And we want to kind of get into the covers on your perspectives on when you win, what's the #1 reason you win? So choose an answer from those that are on the poll question. Are you winning because of your people? Are you winning most often because your product or your service is clearly differentiated? Everyone in the marketplace knows it. Option number three, are you winning because the customer, the client, or the prospect sees more return on investment with your solutions comparative to other organizations? Or is it, frankly, because you outsell them? Or is it something other than those four? So take a minute to think about the number one reason that you win. And while you do that, just for some perspective, what we're focused here on is the controllables for the sales and business development unit. I mean, the reality is that most of us on this call probably don't control research and development or product development or marketing or technology, right? But we control the interaction with the client. We control that commercial discussion and how to articulate the connectivity between what the client wants and what we can provide. Let's take a look at some of the results here. So fascinating to see such a small fraction winning on the merits of outselling the competition, which is actually great news for this audience. If you think about it, our experience, so I was on the corporate side for about 15 years, and now I've been on this side of the net working with sales organizations globally for the last 17 years. And our perspective is that if you're not commoditized yet, you soon will be. Everyone is or will soon be commoditized. And, the statement, what makes us different is we are customer-centric, or what makes us different is we are client-centric, is a statement we've heard from every single organization that we've worked with, right? So what ultimately renders that difference is really a function of what we want to introduce to you as a strategic opportunity pursuit equation. If you could put the equation on screen here, Kathy, what you'll see here are some variables in an equation that point to your ability as sellers and business developers, account managers, relationship managers, to have an impact on both the numerator and the denominator of an equation like this. If you reflect on some of the questions in the poll, what we know, and you told us this a minute ago, is that sometimes you win because your people are better, full stop. Other times, the customer, the prospect can't see the difference. You have rock stars and so does everybody else. Sometimes you win because your solutions are differentiated or your ROI is clearly superior. And other times, it's really hard for the customer to see the difference. You've got great stuff and so does everybody else. The variable that was the 2% on the poll was that you win based on outselling the competition. And if you think about it for a minute, I know early in my career, getting commoditized made me feel very uncomfortable. But as my career progressed and I've worked with so many sellers and sales leaders, I've recognized that commoditization is a wonderful thing for those that are customer and client facing, because the success is often down to you, right? Where you don't walk into the room with a differentiator called your brand or your differentiated product or your innovation. And so let's look at this green box here, right? When we think about opportunity pursuit strategy as one of the variables in this equation, there are so many things that go into, how effective you are at outselling your competitors. Two of those things that we're highlighting here is your ability to qualify opportunities. And the second that my colleague Kathy will take you through is the ability to ask the most informative questions that are beneficial for both you and for your customer to have heard them. So let's jump forward and introduce this notion.
Rob, can I interrupt just for a second? Just before you jump forward, this question's come up time and again, so if you don't mind, I'll interrupt and ask you. So the equation seems to suggest, maybe you seem to suggest that there was a single thing that made the difference here, but a number of people have asked us over the time and again today that it feels like it's a combination of things rather than just one thing. So is it really just one thing?
It's not really. Great question for all that are asking that question. And our view, Mark, would be that it's not just one thing. In fact, that's why it is an equation. I was not a math major, but I do remember that if these plus signs were, multiplied by signs, anything that is zero in this equation will neutralize everything else, right? So if your opportunity pursuit strategy is dysfunctional, you might lose in spite of the superiority of your people and your solutions and your ROI. Conversely, outselling the competition alone through both qualification and identifying all of the right people and building all of the right relationships, if your ROI is inferior, if your solutions are substandard, it's going to be really, really hard. So it's not usually just one thing, Mark. The thing for us as sellers is that we need to look under every one of these rocks, right? To increase our win rate, we have to be polishing the stone on every one of these variables, and where you all as sellers have the opportunity to most effectively do that is under the cover of the opportunity pursuit strategy. And we get into that a little bit with this opportunity scorecard that I'd like to share with you. The thinking behind having a scorecard was actually pioneered by McKesson back in the early 90s. And the orientation is this: just pause for a minute and reflect on the terms opportunity qualification. When you think about the quality of an opportunity, what we've learned is that it's largely reduced to two dimensions of an opportunity's quality. One is winnability, the other is desirability, and they're not always in harmony. You could have a highly winnable opportunity that might not be the most desirable for you. Conversely, you might have a highly desirable opportunity, maybe it's a big one, but you have no shot at winning that opportunity. Actually bringing some science to how you qualify opportunities is a measure of both thoughtfulness and planfulness on your side, so that you're spending your time on the most logical and impactful opportunities. But it's also respectful of the client's time by being able to bring into focus much more quickly whether it's worth continuing down the path. What I'm finding in this virtual environment is that, post the pleasantries and sincere interest in how my colleagues and my clients are doing and feeling in these times, when we do identify that there's an opportunity to be discussed, the sooner we can bring forward the most impactful things to explore, the sooner we can get on with it, both we and the customer and prospect. There are a lot of organizations that have opportunity scorecards. We bring one to our client that resembles the one that you see here on screen. And essentially all that it really does is illuminates the most critical things to ask and explore when you are qualifying opportunities. I want to share some practical applications that we've seen some of our clients use. I know, Mark, in the opening poll, it sounded like about 25% of the respondents actually have a formal approach. So perhaps some of you on this session actually have a scorecard. But Kathy, if you don't mind, I'd love to draw you in here because you've worked with so many clients on approaches like this. What are some ways that you've seen clients put scorecards like this to work?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. And yeah, what's interesting is we do so much work with people around opportunity management, and we have some pretty robust processes that we introduce around opportunity management. What I've found with a lot of my clients is that not every opportunity needs that robust of a strategic plan. And what we've done really effectively with scorecards and some of my clients is use this as the quick hit to suggest that, we can have a quick 3 to 5 minute diagnosis of what needs to be done. And I'm all about, the actions and the behaviors. And so what they've used is for this to really drive that next set of actions most appropriately.
Yeah, me too, Kathy. I see that a lot. I mean, you can see here, 3 practical applications, as it relates to time management. Look, sometimes opportunities, should not be pursued. Other times they should, less time and energy should go into them. Probably the last thing that you want to hear us tell you right now is to use a scorecard to filter out opportunities, to have fewer things to work on. However, you do have limited time and you probably have enough to do 24/7, 365. And so the allocation of your time, it can be informed by an objective set of criteria. It can be informed by a scorecard like this. The second thing really bridges to what Kathy's talking about here. The ability to quickly look at an opportunity in just a few minutes and identify what has to be done, either to bring that opportunity's quality into focus or what has to be done to advance the likelihood of winning it is pretty powerful. I've seen organizations that have effectively a 5 or 6 to 1 ratio of the presence of these scorecards relative to more formal opportunity planning tools like the Blue Sheet that you may have seen if you've seen some of Miller Heiman solutions, or some of our peers have much more formal diagnostics on opportunities. But a good scorecard is so minimally invasive that you can do that opportunity strategy really quickly. And it's great for coaching in that respect too, for any of the sales and business development leaders on the line. The last, and I would argue most productive application of a scorecard, and in fact the bridge to the balance of this particular session, is to use it to feed the questions that you can ask in your meetings and your calls and your Zoom and Microsoft Teams and go to meetings calls with your clients. And that's, what are the highest priority questions to ask? Kathy, if you could jump forward, one of the things we've seen across virtually every industry and every organization is some commonality to what we call the big six qualifying categories. Irrespective of the organization we work with, we see this 99 times out of 100 that the criteria worth qualifying falls into these six categories. Solution alignment around, how clearly do we understand what the customer is trying to fix, accomplish, or avoid, and how well do we fit with that? Their decision-making process, the timing of implementation, the timing of the decision, the timing of impact, questions around other people. We're seeing a pretty significant increase in the average number of people that are involved in making B2B buying decisions these days, which really increases the importance of recognizing what the motives are for those people, or even who they are that might be involved in the decision-making process beyond the people with whom we're immediately interacting. Competition and budget are two other areas that make most scorecards. Being able to understand the competitive landscape and competitive positioning, and then funding. Is there enough? How much is there? Is there a clear path to getting it? If you jump forward one more, Kathy, I'll just kind of give a bit of a glimpse into how these big six categories might actually find their way into a scorecard. I won't read all of these, but if you think about some of these, if you think about timing, as part of your qualification, if one of the things that you were trying to flush out is the timing, you might want to be exploring whether or not you know all of the elements of their critical path during the decision-making process. If you don't, that's pretty important to figure that out pretty far upstream. Other people, we know who the economic buying influence is. That's a term we use for the final decision maker. Often it's true that we don't know. And the sooner we can find that out, the sooner we can have a clear line of sight to how qualified this opportunity is. We have at least one strong coach or advocate, again, something that is difficult to discern, but so highly correlated with success that it makes the grade on most of the scorecards that we see. Key buying influences describe the existence of budget or a clear path to getting it. I'm probably not the only one on this session that's invested a lot of time and energy in pursuit of opportunities that ultimately went to not get funded because clients or customers went with other alternatives like doing it themselves or using the funding for something else, or something like COVID happened and budget has gone away. So our hope through this was to give you some perspective on the broader sort of macro view of how you pour the foundation of a strong opportunity qualification strategy so that you can bring that part of the dialogue forward in a time-compressed environment like the one we're living in now. I'd like to, at this time, bring in my colleague and friend, Kathy Nelson, to get a little bit even closer to the surface and talk about how some of the questions you can ask or perhaps have asked can inform this strategy. So Kathy, you want to take it from here?
Sure thing, Rob. Thanks for that intro. And I'm excited to be here with you. As Rob suggested, this is really a precious amount of time that you're giving us to, really think about how can you do things differently. And one of the things that we have talked about is how can we make that time more effective and more efficient. Now, Rob teed up kind of the what we need to do, and he always leaves me with the harder bit, which is the how do we go about doing it, right? So what are we going to do in respect to those actual client interactions and conversations so that they're as impactful as they can be? And as we're all getting used to our new normal, I find that time at the very beginning of this whole thing, back in, kind of late February, March, seems to be like, wow, I'm doing jigsaw puzzles and I've got more things, I've got more time on my hands. And over the last couple of weeks, I think all of our organizations have kind of figured out how to fill our time with webinars like this, with online learning opportunities, with all kinds of things that we're focused on, and so time is getting really, really tight. So thinking through how in our new normal can we be most impactful with our client interactions and our time? And as we reflected on putting these thoughts together for you, one of the things that came to me and a colleague shared with me is, gosh, in this time right now, everything's different, but nothing's really changed. So I want us to be thoughtful of the fact that there's no silver bullet here. We don't have a new thing that's going to make you suddenly be, the best you can be in your virtual environment. The foundations of selling and of good question asking are really not distinct right now. but more important than ever that we hone our craft and we really think about how we can do them more effectively. So I'll start by telling you that, and then let's dive in a little bit to what can we do and what can we think about as it relates to our new norm. So there's a couple of things that I often have teams think about as they get ready for a client interaction. And the fact of the matter is most of your client and customer engagements are going to involve you getting some information, you giving some information, and then hopefully you gaining some commitment that you can move the process forward. In the short amount of time that we have with you, we're not going to cover all of these, but I will tell you that when I ask sales professionals which one of these they're best at, you won't be shocked to know we all feel like we're pretty good at giving, right? We give good information. We spend a lot of time creating PowerPoints and thinking about how we're going to present our information. We spend less time from a preparation standpoint thinking about how we're going to get information. Now, what Rob just presented to you were some facts and some things that we might need to learn to most effectively qualify opportunities. So now let's think about, well, how do we go about asking for those things? And so we're focusing right now about getting information. And I'll share with you a few thoughts. One is less is more. We're not suggesting that you go into a client conversation with a laundry list of interrogation-like questions, but that we need to prioritize effectively a few really good dialogue starting questions. Now you ask, okay, how's that different in our new norm? One of the things I'll share is that I think right now we are in service to ourselves if we literally write down a few of those questions and we practice them, maybe with peers, maybe with a manager, or maybe just in our own video and asking those questions and seeing how do they sound? How are they going to come out right now? So really thinking about what questions are we going to ask? How do we prioritize around those? And then recognizing that not all questions are equally easy to ask. Some of them are tougher than others. So let's go into another poll and get your opinion. Which of the question types that we're going to talk about as it relates back to the scorecard are the most challenging for you? So if we think about those items that Rob introduced to us, the solution alignment, decision-making process, timing, asking about other people who might be involved in the decision process, asking about competition, or finally asking about budget. So I'd ask you to think about which ones are most challenging. And as you do that, recognize that as we talk through ways to craft questions and in the essence of in providing practical advice, we're going to give you some questions to contemplate. Know that our questions are going to vary depending on who we're talking to, where they are in their decision process. So it's not a one-size-fits-all, but some of them are going to be a little bit more easier to come by than others. Then I'll ask to see how we're doing with our poll. Interesting. Okay, so almost really pretty well balanced here, but it appears that we're not as comfortable talking about budget and competition. Not shocking, right? So let's dive in a little bit to some of the actual questions and thinking about how do we approach these various topics and give you some sample questions for each. As Rob mentioned, there's some deliverables that you'll get at the end of this if you choose to. One is a copy of that scorecard. Another is going to be a set of these questions. I also keep in mind that we're going to ask you guys, what great questions do you ask? And we're putting a compiled response back to the audience around that. So we'll get to that at the end as well. Let's dive into a few questions that you might ask around each of these core topics. Starting with solution alignment. Solution alignment really has to do with helping you to think through what is your customer trying to accomplish or fix or avoid. We often call it their solution image. Again, think about our current reality. How frequently is that solution image changing? As we're interacting with clients today, their solution image has to do with how are they going to keep their teams engaged. As Rob and I do a lot of work with large selling organizations, they're asking us questions about how do I keep my team busy right now? How do I help them to engage with their customers in this virtual environment? How do I know how impactful they're being and what they're doing? So recognize that your customer solution image is changing dramatically. Don't make assumptions around this. But one of the things that I've found to be really successful for my business is keeping a future forward view, right? So not that we're not worried about what's happening today and this week, but what we really want to do is ask about what do the results need to look like 6 months from now. Let's figure out how we're going to get out of this current situation and asking what their solution image is for the future. So there's a lot of good questions here, but I really like that top one that gets us into that future forward kind of discussion. I'll share with you some other questions as it relates to, for example, the decision-making process. And again, in our new norm, a lot is changing within our customers about how they can make decisions, about who's going to be involved in those decisions. But I think it's really critical that we not make assumptions that we know and ask the important, validation question. Gosh, last week when we spoke, you mentioned that things were going to be moving forward like this. Now, what's changed? What's different? Help me understand how the final decision around this project perhaps is going to be made. Or another really critical question that I love on this one is, have you decided to decide? So really understanding in an early fashion, if you can, is there an option that you're not going to do this at all? And so asking about how the decision process is going to be made can be really critical. But how you ask that question, making sure that it's in service to them and their process, not in service to you and your selling process. Another category that Rob teed up is one around timing. Talk about something that's changed dramatically right now. We kind of teed up this entire conversation around how precious time is right now. But the timing of your customers' activities and decisions can be dramatically impacted by everything that's happening right now. And so I think it's really important that you think about, how am I going to ask about what is changing with respect to the timing around this decision? I had a situation recently where I was in the midst of a very large deployment with one of my clients, and they said, gosh, based on everything that's going on, really think we're going to need to push this off, 6 to 8 months, and we're going to go through some quiet periods. And I said, okay, that may be the fact. However, again, going into the future, when do you need to start to see the impact of this particular project that we're engaged with? And they said, oh, we need to see the impact before the end of the year. We can't wait, another fiscal year to start to see the impact. That question got us into a very different conversation than putting everything on hold. The question got us into a discussion of, how do we change our approach? How do we make this as impactful as it can be, given the limitations around travel and connectivity? So the way you ask your questions can really change sometimes the outcome of the answers and the project in general. Another category that we mentioned, and one that can be sometimes in that category of what I call tough questions, is one around other people. And the reason this one can be tough is that sometimes the people that we're interacting with can feel like we're not being respectful of them when we ask, hey, who else is involved, right? Who else should I be talking to? Can sometimes make somebody feel a little bit defensive and on edge. And especially right now, as we're talking about what's different in our worlds, well, what's different is people are concerned. Is my job going to be here? Are my teams going to be okay? Is my company, do they know that I'm doing the right things because they can't see me doing them? So right now, a lot of empathy for the people that you're interacting with is going to be really necessary. But one of the ways that I like to engage and understand the broader perspective of who else is to frame the question with the words, in addition to yourself. So if I was speaking with Rob, in addition to you, Rob, who else in the organization is going to be most concerned or impacted by the success or the potential failure of this initiative? Really starts to make Rob feel like he's very important and we need to think about others. The other thing I'd have us thinking about with respect to other people right now is the fact that we have a really unique opportunity to pull people into meetings that isn't really realistic when we're out, engaging with people in a live setting. People can jump on quick phone calls and virtual discussions like this in a way that isn't always practical in other situations. So I'd encourage us to really not only ask about who else is involved, but can that person join us on our next call so that we can start to engage with people on a broader basis than maybe we can in our more traditional selling situation. Another kind of tough category that I've found is really understanding competition. And your poll indicated that this one was a little bit challenging for us. And the reason that competition can be challenging to talk about is sometimes we don't want to introduce it to the situation, right? We don't want to acknowledge that there's others out there that can do what we do. Sometimes we don't want to engage the client to think about what the benefits of the competition might be. And also, sometimes we just feel like we know them pretty well. We don't really need to ask about the competition because we kind of have a good handle on that. I'm going to encourage us right now, especially, understand not just the competition as we've historically thought about it, which is often another company, but asking broadly about how else are you exploring, getting the results from this initiative. So really getting broader in the competitive alternatives, not just the competition. So a question might be phrased as the top one is here, help me understand some of the alternatives you're considering. And then a follow-on question might be, and how do you feel about your options? That gets us understanding what we're up against, and what we're up against might be internal resources, or it might be doing nothing for the time being. Those are important for us to think about as we qualify in and out of those opportunities. Our final category, which many of you said was the most challenging for us to ask about in the poll that we just asked, has to do with budget. So since you decided it was the most challenging, I'm going to pull Rob back into the conversation and ask Rob. He had a really good example. We were chatting about this in our preparation. And Rob, you shared with me a great way that you framed up a question that got you into a very different dialogue with your customer.
Yeah, you're right, Kathy. I'm happy to share it. By the way, just to Mark, I'm noticing in the Q&A box some really good questions from Bob and Jody and Craig, and we should just acknowledge that if time doesn't permit us to get into those, because they're probably worthy of much more dialogue that we can get after in a truncated way, that we should connect with them offline, and certainly with anyone else that has deeper questions like that.
Yeah, thank you,
Kathy,
Rob. Please do keep asking. I've answered them as we've gone along, and then I think it's a great idea connecting afterwards if we need to. Love to. Thank you.
Yeah, Kathy, happy to give you the anecdote around budget, but Kathy's also shared a theme here that you validated in the poll on this notion of tougher questions. And my own experience with this is that sometimes because they're tough, they fall off the table entirely, to say nothing of prioritizing them early in the qualification, which is actually can be the opposite of helpful, right? Like solution alignment, of course, should be the first thing. Are their needs, congruent with what we do? If it's not, we could be wasting each other's time. But even if they are, there's a lot more qualification to be done. When you think about this tough question categories, Kathy's talked about asking people about other people, asking about competition, now asking about budget. I think it's a mindset thing, Kathy. I think the reason people think it's tough is that because they feel like they don't deserve to know that information. They don't deserve to ask it, that it's intrusive, that it's invasive. And if that's the mindset, you're always going to struggle finding the words and the courage to ask those really important questions. But if the mindset is flipped to one that sort of is the footing is this, that I'm asking these questions on your behalf, the customer, the client, the prospect. In other words, the reason I want to ask about competition is so that I can help shine a light on the variances, the variables that will help you, the customer, make the most informed decision. If I'm asking you about other people, the reason I'm doing that is that I want to make sure that not only are your objectives met, but also the objectives of the other people. On this topic of budget, my mindset has evolved to be, the reason I'm asking about budget is that I don't want you to waste time, and I don't want to waste time on my side. So I like to phrase questions like, are you going to need some help in creating a business case? Are you going to need some help in establishing funding? And if not, fantastic. what is your investment tolerance? Because I want to make sure we scope this appropriately so that you're not wasting time saying whoa, you're way low, you're way high, you're quoting something that's not even what I'm looking for. The situation Kathy's referring to was a couple of weeks ago with a client where, look, so many of our clients and customers, their budgets are being cut and slashed, and we can assume that that's the case, or we can ask if that's the case. And this particular one, after learning a lot about a proposal that this client wanted us to put in front of them, which was quite helpful, the question was, listen, has your budget been impacted by COVID-19? And if so, to what extent? And the reason I'm asking is that I want to make sure that this proposal you've asked us to put together is aligned with your budget tolerance, right? Now, one client might say, I'm not telling you that. Another client might say, I don't even know if I have budget, but your proposal will help me go get it. This client said, our budget's been cut by 2/3. So therefore, I have this amount. And if we can get close to this amount, we'll be able to continue the conversation. In one question, we have the clarity we needed to go back and do the productive work around a proposal that was going to matter in the end. So those are some thoughts, Kathy, on the budget question.
Great. Thanks for that, Rob. And yeah, I thank you for introducing that, that idea of mindset. And that's where I come back to as we kind of come to conclusion around these questions, really thinking about that mindset with respect to less is more, right? So we're not talking about an interrogation. We're talking about starting a great dialogue. And the dialogue is to help make sure that your customer's making a great decision and that you're engaging with them throughout the way. Prioritizing those questions based on the criteria that we've shared. So that scorecard criteria, that's some examples that we're sharing with you. Your categories could be slightly different, but as Rob said, those big six have seemed to really transcend through the various scorecards that we've made over the years. And so thinking about how you prioritize those, and then don't be shy of those tough questions. And the reason that Rob just shared around that mindset that we can be effective with those is to really be in service to our customer. And this is the piece that I'm just really passionate about, is it doesn't come naturally. As many organizations and salespeople that say that they're customer-centric and they're really focused on their customer, at the end of the day, most of us are focused on what we do and the products and services that we sell. So I'm going to encourage you, write these things down. Practice them with peers. It doesn't come as naturally as you think it does. And if I go back to the very, I think it was the second poll, Rob, that you did when you asked organizations or the people on the call, what makes your organization successful? The very last thing you said was your selling, this process. And I'm going to bring you back to, this is all about you. This is in your control. And how we engage with our customers right now in this very challenging time is truly something that can set you apart. And I feel strongly that if we create some great selling habits right now, we can carry those great selling habits well beyond our remote situation. So we hope this has been helpful and hope that you've taken some practical tips. As I mentioned earlier, not only did we share some questions, but we're also going to ask, do you have some questions you'd like to share with us? We post this in our first webinar as well, so we've got quite a myriad started, but we'd like to add yours to the mix. So you can take a minute if you can and use the QR code on this screen to find your way to actually submitting some great questions that you've used throughout your selling career that you think have been really impactful. So we will share this as a guide that's going to come back to you, and we thank those that have already submitted their questions. And with that, Mark, I think I'm going to turn it back over to you, unless there's any questions you wanted me to respond to.
There were lots, Kathy, and we will respond to all the questions that were in the pieces, but nothing specific. So let's leave it for now, if you would, and we'll give people a few minutes back at the end. So thank you both of you for your time, and all of you for spending the hour or so with us. Please do consider spending a few minutes on our challenge. Just in in the off chance any of you are in any way competitive, from the first one of these we ran, we did have over 300 responses to the challenge. And I would ask you to do it because we're actually producing brand new data. So what are the questions that you're asking in 2020 in a time of COVID-19? This has never happened in the world. So we're loving the different thoughts and ideas that are coming in, and we'll as I say, we'll put it together in the pack, but also there's we're interesting to see whether there's a difference between the types of questions that are being asked now in the current world, in virtual with a COVID-19 scenario versus others. So please help us with our original research. You'll turn up on a paper somewhere in 10 years time when students are looking back on all that madness of 2020, hopefully looking back on it. So thank you for that. Remember also that we will send you a link to the foundational scorecard and the other assets in here. So we'll send you a link to let you have those in more detail with this deck in as well. And as you can see from the page here with the QR code, the sessions are available on demand. So if you use the QR code, you can go back and listen to the other sessions. If you were able to join us for some of the others and some of the happy hours, then thank you. Thank you for spending your time. We'll miss you. This is the last of the sessions we have. But in the meantime, take 10 minutes, 15 minutes, I'm English, so you go make yourself a nice cup of tea and relax into your next session. But please look after yourselves and those around you. Thank you for your time.